Hello, Starseeds, and welcome to Neurolinguistic Astrology Live. This is going to be a presentation that's going to be all about synastry. And if you don't know what synastry is an astrology reading when you take charts of two different people and you it's like the collision of two charts together. So commonly you would do a synastry reading with relationships. So the very first synastry reading I did was with Amber Heard and Johnny Depp back when that huge trial was happening, just to take a look at what was going on between the charts of those two people. And so with synastry, it's kind of fun. You can do synastry with pretty much any two entities that have a time of birth or time of inception, and we're going to get into what that all means in terms of astrology, and from a neurolinguistic astrology lens, what that means from the sacred stories that it means for you to be able to embody in this incarnation that makes sense for you. And so we're going to use Bonnie and Clyde as an example of star-crossed lovers, and as an example to show how, based on certain decisions and certain archetypes, you would see that Bonnie and Clyde were truly meant to collide with each other and generate all these sparks. So you'll see what I mean. And I got to know a little bit more as well about the movie that happened with, what was her name? Faye Dunaway. And the actor's name escaping me. When I do the edit, I will hopefully dub that in. So without further ado, let's get into the actual presentation about Bonnie and Clyde and these star-crossed lovers and the synastry between them. All right, my friends, here we are. This is the presentation, and as you can see, I have a little bit of an 8-bit video game theme going on, just because it's all to say that life, the game of life, is like a video game. And if we think about our natal chart, or when we are born, and the placement of all the planets and all the luminaries in the sky is so unique to you. And so as a result, we can take all these angles and all these potential storylines that are going to prove to be more much in flow with what happened to us, or in terms of the energies that were imprinted on us when we were born, and know how we will then interact with other people's charts. So that part is really interesting, because that's kind of like why we call ourselves sacred soma alchemy as well. It's like the alchemy between people. We are alchemical beings, and so as we interact with others, sparks generate. And so even if we think of astrology in terms of elemental and modality qualities, so if, let's say, a person is very fire oriented and they are matched with someone who is water, those seem like they're opposing forces. But if they work together in a way that is synergistic, you get steam, and steam can be used to power many things. So that's one of the topics, or one of the ways we can kind of look at how energies bounce against each other. So let's get into Bonnie and Clyde themselves. I didn't use their actual pictures. I used the movie picture because I like it. Okay, so let me just do a quick sound check, make sure I'm coming through okay. Yeah, perfect. All right, so today we're going to be doing a synastry astrology reading live for Bonnie and Clyde, as a way to talk about fated or destined relationships, soulmates, so to speak. So anyone born with, or anything that was begun at any moment in time, will carry with it the characteristics of that specific moment. And this is why astrology is such a wonderful classification system for the way reality functions, because based on the fact that, you know, the sun rises every day and sets every night, it changes with the seasons, and you can map all of that, and then based on that you end up with these cycles. And so based on when we are born within those cycles, there's a certain flavor, there's a certain specialness, there's certain aspects that are unique to that. And so we're going to talk about Bonnie and Clyde and look at why it makes a lot of sense that they ended up together. And also we're going to go into a death chart of both of these as well, because they died at the same time because there was an ambush. And we're going to get into that as well, because this was actually something that a lot of other astrologers, I'm going to credit them as well in the show notes, have done a lot of good work already about this. All right, So first, of course, I need to define my terms before we fully get into everything. I'm a little wizard there in the corner, because I feel like when you interpret astrology, there is a level of magic to it, and that is why I term Monday as Magic Monday. All right, so in terms of synastry readings, when we take your birth chart, I already said this at the top of this conversation, that when you were born, the sky had a blueprint or a map of it that's uniquely yours. And so if you were born right now, we have a new moon right now. We have a new moon in Cancer. And so that's actually a great example. So if you were an individual who was born on a new moon, you're going to have the themes of that new moon imprinted on you from an emotional standpoint because of what the moon represents. And now, so if we take the natal charts of different individuals to see where their storylines collide with each other, you can find where if someone has a moon sign in one sign and someone has a moon sign in the other, that there might be a connection there. It creates a different aspect, or different planets will make different aspects, with different parts of the other partner's chart. And then we're going to go into a death reading, also known as an ambush reading in this case. Time of death or transition in this case also creates a chart of which we can derive a meaning or story from what we can learn from now, because it was really interesting, the date, the time that Bonnie and Clyde were killed. It created something that was called a grand sextile. It looks like a Star of David, and we'll get into that in just a moment. Stay tuned. So Bonnie and Clyde's synastry chart. We've got Bonnie, who was born in Rowena, Texas, in the United States on October 1st, 1910. October 1st is actually one of my really good friends growing up, one of her birthdays as well, at 6:02 p.m. And she is the outer circle that you can see here in the chart. And then we've got Clyde, who was born in Telco, Texas, United States, March 24th, 1909 at 8:55 p.m. and he is the inner circle. And so just to get a sense of all the different planets in each of these two individuals' charts, if we look at Bonnie first, she's on the outer circle. So she's a Libra, born October 1st. She also has a lot of stuff going on in where her sun is. So we've got Mars here making a really close conjunction with her sun in Libra. And so anytime you have like the sun and Mars, it's like your main sole purpose and the first general behind that. So it's like you'll also end up with like a fighter spirit as well. I have this conjunction in a different sign, but because it's in the sign of Libra, it's going to have a flavor of partnership with it. So that makes a lot of sense, since that Bonnie, due to her relationship with Clyde, ended up being quite like the fighter spirit kind of became embodied, if you see that. Other things going on in Libra here is Jupiter, so the idea of expansion in the sign of Libra. So she ended up with notoriety, attention, due to the fact that she was in this relationship with Clyde. And so that kind of makes sense, like partnership, Libra owning that as well as her ascending. See her, her outside, she's the outside circle. So her ascending, she's in Aries ascending. I remember that very clearly because her chart as a result lines up with the first house being Aries and all of that. So the Libra house, Libra does rule the house, the sign of partnership in this case. I will actually drop a link to my presentation about ascending, like why your birth time is important, and then why your ascending sign lines up your housing system. Like, I've only recently gotten into the houses. So if you think about the signs here, they all rule the houses that they're in. That's why there's 12 houses of the zodiac, right? But going back to Miss Bonnie right here, her Mercury right here is in Virgo. Her moon's in Virgo, as well as Venus is in Virgo. So all of this opposes a lot of stuff happening with Clyde. So off the top, what you can see already in this synastry is that Clyde was an Aries. His sun is an Aries. And so already here, there's already a strong connection right from the beginning, because her rising sign and his sun sign are in the same sign of Aries. And that is a very physical, action, fiery, passionate sign. And we actually just recently switched lunar nodes into that this little degree of late degree of Aries from Taurus. And so that comes with it a lot of upheaval. So Aries is all about the action and initiation. So that was already to start with. Other things here, because she has a lot of action already happening with her sun, it means that a lot of her other luminary planets, those energies are going to be opposing Clyde's planets. So what Clyde has going on here is, oh my goodness, yeah, his Venus is in Pisces, as well as Mercury is in Pisces. That's interesting, a male Pisces. And a male Pisces with a Mercury in Pisces. So he's not a Pisces, sorry, but Venus and Mercury, you wouldn't call this a close conjunction, but they are residing in the same sign. So the energies of Pisces in terms of communication. And so Pisces is a mutable water sign in charge of the dreamland. So I would say that Clyde wasn't always maybe truthful, or in terms of, well, I mean, like they ran a gang and stuff, so I guess it was part of it. But Venus here is also like under the surface, that kind of thing. So the Venus here, I know that there's also the Venuses opposing each other, Venus and Virgo right here. So another opposition between planets that very much have to do with partnership. And so those, we're going to get into more of what oppositions mean. But as I said, when an opposition comes into contact with each other, this can be a very fruitful aspect, but it can also like destroy both of them. And we'll get into the death chart and we can determine if that was something that was always doomed to happen. The reason why I even really wanted to do this chart was because I stumbled on a poem that Bonnie had written called The Trail's End, and it was just about how she said that, you know, she knows that people are going to tell stories about her and Clyde and like what happened and what they're going to like lay all this stuff on, and it just goes to like what's going on now in terms of what I'm always saying, what those who tell the stories who rule the world, and who's telling your story. And what astrology does is it empowers you to recognize and realize the storylines that are available to you, are most available to you, to be more in flow. And if we look here too, he's got a moon in Taurus, and so from an emotional standpoint, steadfast, and so he would be able to commit to Bonnie together. So even though they were like, you know, ride or die couple, right? His north node is in Taurus here. So we did have the north node in Taurus. It just shifted into Aries, which now comes with it a lot of action. As I said, it being in Taurus here with its moon means to me that his emotions are very much tied to what his personal destiny is. And hold on, where is Bonnie's? Oh, north node here. Oh yeah, here. Okay, so, and this is Pluto, I believe. Pluto has different things. Yes, I believe this is Pluto. This is Neptune right here. Regardless, north node is in Gemini. Kind of makes sense in terms of Bonnie because her poems still survive her. So in terms of her destiny, and even though they ended up dying in that shootout, her words do still live on, and their notoriety also does still live on. The media made a frenzy of them. They made a movie about them, right? Bonnie Clyde in 1967, and I think Natural Born Killers with Scorsese did that one. That was also an ode to whole Bonnie and Clyde movie. Let's see here if there's anything else here to kind of point out. As I said, it's about a lot of oppositions here because Aries and Libra are opposites, and so there's always a strong magnetic attraction when it comes to signs like that. And if you are a particular sign, it is always good to look at the opposing sign for some intel or some more insight as to how your own personal sign reacts and why you maybe have certain irritants or frustrations or things that can be worked out by changing perspective and looking at things from the other side. Okay, so that's that first synastry of Bonnie and Clyde. there's a little bit more I'm going to get into more detail in terms of in my blog, just from, because there's a lot going on in here about, so for example, she is very much a Libra, because even before Bonnie met Clyde, she was already she was already married, I think. And remember, this was like the Great Depression, right? So like everyone was poor, everyone was like, you're just trying to scrap to make things, like to make ends meet, right? So she was always going to be partnered with someone, and it's like all of her energies are around being a wife too, like a good wife as well. But she does have that fighter spirit. But yes, it's in the realm of being a partner. Okay, so let's go into the death chart. I am not going to take credit for this chart. This was done by Grand Trines. I'm going to leave a link to the full analysis, which is on his site. So Bonnie and Clyde were killed on an ambush by this highwayman. And if we think about Hollywood movies, and we think of the archetype of the highwayman who has like this one-track mind and trying to get all the criminals and like run them down. And so Bonnie and Clyde were killed by, I forget his name. He was like some martial hero highwayman. And when they killed Bonnie and Clyde, there was like a whole bunch of them, and they fired a whole bunch of bullets. The time of event was on May 23rd, oh, I don't think this is right, what I have in terms of the actual date. But it was May 23rd, I think it was 1934. I will make sure that's correct, but at 8:58 a.m. I know it was a Sunday morning. And Bonnie apparently didn't want to go on this Sunday drive. They were ambushed by the Rangers, and they were shot on sight. They were shot dead. They were just completely executed at that time. And so one would argue like, oh, they're criminals, it's justified. But if you talk about the highwayman that killed them, he actually had way more kills than Clyde. And you could say like, well, he was the law, but like they didn't have what we have now in terms of phones, being able to like actually know what happened. And when Bonnie and Clyde were ambushed and killed, they didn't fire one shot. Well, not one shot was fired. It was just supposed to be some like nice Sunday drive, and then they were just ambushed by like a whole bunch of Rangers. So they both died at the same time. And as you can see here, there is this Star of David formation that is formed at their time of death. Now, the astrologer who did the analysis on the time of death looked at the fact that this is actually, what an interesting time, right? And so it's almost like something so much more favorable and positive in terms of a ritual should have been done at this time, as opposed to this killing, which now just makes me feel like it's super creepy, right? So let's take a look. The sun was in Gemini at that time, and I've talked about this in the past, where Gemini and Sagittarius function as galactic gates in and out of this realm. And so you'll find a lot of things like happen at this time as a way to almost leverage the energies of portals being open, let's say. And so the fact that they were ambushed and killed on this very specific date in the morning is very telling. And if we look here too, what else is going on in Gemini? We've got Chiron and Mercury. I don't know what this glyph is. I feel like that must be Saturn because it looks like a scythe. And we also have Mars here kind of hanging out in Taurus, just a little bit on the outside. I feel like that almost represents the doggedness of the law enforcement kind of coming in on it and like entrapping in all this stuff within the sign of Gemini for it to kind of traverse out. Let's see here. What was the moon doing? Okay, the moon is in Virgo, which is where that's Bonnie's natal placement, which is interesting. South node North Node. North Node was in Aquarius. That's really interesting. And then the South Node was in Leo. So that's another opposition to kind of look at, right? Like Leo and Aquarius, where you think of like very social, societal ideals, things like that, and more of like the will and I am. I look at Leo and Aquarius as kind of similar to Aries and Libra, but just in like a different kind of modality. Let's see. And so to get into this formation right here, the grand sextile, there are 2 grand trines happening and then oppositions as well. And the way the saying goes is that trines are almost like too easy. So the oppositions force the trines to act. So I feel like this was obviously planned very much ahead of time, like the time of date. They wanted to make the most of the story that could be told out of taking down Bonnie and Clyde this way. I don't know if they anticipated the fact that, because the same highwayman that took them down, he ended up, I think, getting mad at whoever did the movie on Bonnie and Clyde, because the way he was portrayed was not very favorable. It looked like, you know, like it's like poor young kids in love going around, and like this guy just like shot them all up. So yes, they were criminals. It was the Great Depression. It's not necessarily an excuse, but at the same time is that we can't say that we know the whole story of everything, because we only know what the newspapers of the time tell us, and as well as like what the astrology also tells us, as well as what we have in terms of, I mean, I'm not trying to Hollywood glamorize it, right, by saying like, okay, like that's what Natural Born Killers talked about, the idea that we get just enamored with the idea of like, oh my gosh, hot couple in love and going around killing people. But it's more to it than that. There were certain conditions. She talks about in her poem about how Clyde used to be an upstanding, law-abiding citizen, but then he kept on kicking him down. And I mean, if it was the Great Depression, like what were your chances of actually getting a good job? So this is all to say that their fated demise, their death chart, their ambush chart was one that seems very fated. It seems like one that needed to happen in this whole realm so that this story gets told, maybe just so that I could take a look at it. But yeah, you've got what happens in this type of formation. This also occurred in winter solstice of 2012. So I want you all to like take a little snapshot in your head and be like, what was I doing in 2012 winter solstice? And see if the certain energies kind of match up. Astrology is funny how it works out that way. And so just as a little bit of a learning opportunity, we're going to close off with just some of the aspects that are really interesting. So as I said, we have oppositions. And there are 3 ways, there are 3 things that can happen when you have an opposition of like 2 opposing forces. So your sun, like in Bonnie and Clyde's case, the suns are in 2 opposing suns. So those forces kind of push against each other. Now, there are 3 things that can happen. 1, let's take fire and water as an example, where you'd have the fire basically being extinguished by the water. That's one scenario. The other scenario is the fire basically evaporates or, you know, extinguishes the water in a way. It's not extinguished. The fire gets extinguished. The fire would be making the water evaporate. So those are the 2 different things that happen. So I guess if it's like rock, paper, scissors, who wins? But the third way, and the most ideal way for an opposition to kind of generate power, is for the fire and water to work cohesively together, and you generate steam, and then it powers all this good stuff. And so that's the key to oppositions whenever they appear in an astrology chart. To think of the energies as they push and pull on each other. I have a pretty tough opposition in my chart. For example, I have a Sun and Pluto opposition. So you have those energies pulling and pushing against you. And like depending on the signs they're in, that will also dictate a bit of the flavor as to what challenges you have to deal with in terms of what parts to listen to you. And in my case, which planet you want to take the lead and the role, and which one has like more of your best interest at heart, which one is kind of more delving into what your lower expressions are. And then trines, I talked a bit about grand trines when I did Tina Turner's death chart, and trines themselves are aspects of ease. So they are when two planets or two luminaries or any time an angle is generated, it's a harmonious angle. And so the energies of each of those luminaries, of each of those planets, are then amplified with each other. There's a saying, as I said in Synastry, that too many trines make for a boring relationship. You need to have a couple squares to keep things interesting. And so that's why we have squares. There you go. And squares are more of a challenging position. It's a 90-degree right angle. And so if we think of oppositions, it's then the square position. This is also something that I feel like gets underrepresented when we're talking about moon phases, because we're always like, we're in a new moon right now, so a time of opening up, renewal, rejuvenation. And there's the full moon, right? The accumulation of whatever it is you're doing at the new moon. But there's also like the square point when, like, to us it looks like a half moon, but really it's a quarter moon. And if you have this in your chart as well, that can be it's a bit of friction, because it's not necessarily harmonious energy. It's a hard right angle, and there are no hard right angles in nature. It can sometimes feel like, okay, no matter which way I go, something in me is going to say this feels wrong. So how do I resolve that? But in learning how to, because there is always a way to resolve it, that's where true understanding and power and enlightenment comes from. So this is why they say, like, if you just have a lot of trines, like, what are you going to learn? You need a couple squares to kind of space things out. And then as within, so without. So just like how these luminary bodies in the sky, like Mercury representing communication and speech and thought, and Venus representing relationships and beauty within ourselves, we also play these roles for others in our lives and different storylines, whatever they happen to be. And so it's a matter of recognizing the importance of our own stories to other people's stories. And in Synastry especially, when you have those charts colliding with each other, you're going to generate brand new angles, brand new aspects that can be looked at. And you are now going to have these brand new stories that would have never existed before if it was just that, like, one entity doing its thing. And so that's all to say that, like, Bonnie and Clyde were fated lovers. And is this something that you could, like, look at and go, like, oh, I predict them actually getting together, which is what I feel like astrologers, you're like, oh, who's going to be my future lover? Like, could you predict that looking at Bonnie and Clyde's chart? Possibly. I'm sure there's some astrologers who could do it, but I'm more interested from the perspective of what are the themes that generate, what are the stories that are created as a result of these two individuals coming together and colliding, because we're now learning about oppositions. And when you're dealing with your partner, let's say, maybe you do have some opposing aspects in your charts with each other, and recognition of that comes with it a lot of forgiveness and understanding when you're communicating with your partner about some certain things. And you can just realize certain things about yourself that perhaps are acting out the shadow side of the sign. Let's put it that way. Okay, so we have reached the end of this fun little presentation. I only did this one live on Rumble. I'm going to be posting the replay onto YouTube very shortly. But first I'll be doing my Monday Magic show. So stay tuned for all of that. But for more magic, this show is sponsored by Sacred Soma Alchemy, our Formula 1, 2, and 3 Soma supplements and life-enhancing condiments such as ashwagandha and ginger. I am going to drop a link to where you can get all of the fun details on our supplements meant to give you a reconnection with your Earth avatar, with this existence, because we talk a lot in this show about the stars and the cosmos and the pathways, and like that's all very like upper chakra stuff. And so it's good to ensure that you keep your body in good working order so that you are healthy and empowered enough to live out the storylines that you are meant to live out. here to do, right? And so with that, I hope that you had a wonderful new moon in Cancer. I hope that you learned something. This is a good time to throw away old stuff that no longer serves and step into a new way of being. And a good way to kind of do that is also to learn from the past. And I'm sure that we've all been in relationships that perhaps were faded and soul connections, but it can be a tragedy. Like that's the story to be lived out, or like it's just a recognition of where we are and what we're playing out. And not to say that it's doomed, because there is always a choice. It just means that there are ones that are going to feel more right to you. And the determinant of that, the beauty of it, is that it's always you, right? So anyways, without further ado, I hope you have a great evening, day, afternoon, lunchtime, wherever you are when you're listening to this in the cosmos. And I look forward to chatting very soon. Until next time, Starseeds.